evening, everyone, and welcome to the August 24th Ad Hoc Finance Committee meeting. Ms. Thompson, roll call.
Yes.
I'll take care of that, Ms. Page. First, I'd like to read the electronic meeting statement. This meeting is being held. This meeting is being held as an electronic meeting pursuant to and compliance with Richmond City Council's Ordinance 2020-093, adopted April 9th, 2020, and extended by Ordinance number 2020-183, adopted August 20th, 2020, and by Ordinance number 2020-232, adopted December 14th, 2020, and the school board's resolution approved on April 20th, 2020. Simultaneous translation is being provided tonight in Spanish via Zoom, and the meeting notice contained information on how individuals needing translation services could obtain the service. The meeting notice also stated that the meeting would be a virtual meeting and would be live streamed for the public on the school division's Facebook page, and the link was provided. The agenda of the meeting was posted to board docs. After roll call, we will state how many members of the board are participating at the time of roll call. Ms. Dorr, Ms. Page.
Here.
Ms. Rizzi.
Here.
At this time, we will proceed as an informational meeting until Ms. Dorr arrives.
Okay. Well, first, I would like to say welcome, Ms. Richardson. I'm not sure if this is your first committee meeting.
It is.
So again, welcome, and we're so happy to have you join us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. So the first item on the agenda is to review of the student activity funds turnover audit consolidated report. Mr. Parker.
All right. So I'm going to hand this over to Ms. LaTanya Holloway. She's the auditor that conducts this audit and performs this audit as the lead auditor. So she'll be talking through this whole through the audit report. LaTanya, do you need me to share the report on the screen? You're talking on mute. You're on mute. You're on mute.
I'm sorry about that. You can. I have it put up on my screen so you can share it for everyone else.
Okay. All right. Let me remember how to do this.
And good evening, everyone.
All right. Can everybody see? All right, Tanya, you're good.
All right, so I will be discussing with everyone this afternoon our turnover audit. Basically, a turnover audit is conducted when the principal and or finance officer leaves the particular school that they're working at. And we conduct the audits basically to determine whether or not the school is in compliance. They have adequate controls and processes for managing student activity funds and appropriated funds. So that is basically the purpose of doing a turnover student activity fund audit. The audit period in which we reviewed was July 2020 through March 2021. We audited 16 schools. Of the 16 schools, there were 3 schools that we want to highlight that did not have any audit findings at all. Those schools are Thomas Henderson Middle School, Southampton Elementary School, and Woodville Elementary School. Upon completion of the actual turnover audit, we sit down with the principal as well as the finance officer, and we go over the audit findings with them, and we explain the next process. They will receive a report, and with that report, they are to give us management responses of how they plan to, fix the issues that they have in the report going forward. We identified 107 findings out of the 16 schools in which we audited. The areas in which we audited were cash receipts, cash disbursements, and accounting procedures. And we do that to ensure that all schools are in compliance with Richmond Public Schools policies, regulations, as well as procedures. Mr. Parker, take it back up. Okay. Back up some more. Back up to cash receipts. Okay. So for cash receipts, what we look for is controls and safeguards over cash receipts, verification that receipts were deposited into the appropriate SAF account, timeliness of bank deposits, deposits are accurately entered into the accounting system, EPS, collections by staff, and the timely transmittal of these receipts to the finance officer, completeness of the settlement sheet and receipt forms, adequate supporting documentation, and we took a sample of receipts and deposit slips to look for accuracy and compliance with policies, regulations, and procedures. Check disbursements, controls and safeguards over cash disbursements, timeliness of payments, completeness of the expenditure voucher form and checks, authorized signatures on all checks, which means dual signatures, adequate supporting documentation, properly record and void checks. Checks are accurately entered into the accounting system, EPS, verification that checks were dispersed from the appropriate SAF account, purchases were made in accordance with Richmond Public Schools policies, regulations, and procedures. We also reviewed athletic documentation, and this is for the high schools only, to ensure schools are following RPS policies, procedures, regulations, and best practices. We reviewed change funds to ensure they were handled in accordance with RPS policies, regulations, and procedures. And we took a sample of some checks and we looked for the accuracy and compliance with policies, regulations, and procedures. The next area we reviewed is accounting procedures. We reviewed school safes to ensure they were operable, securely located, properly locked, and access properly restricted. So, that just means that individuals who are supposed to have access to the safes are the only ones that are using the safes. Reconciliations for completeness, accuracy, and timeliness to ensure schools were following the school board's guidance in the closure of all savings and investment accounts, segregation of duties, checks are investigated prior to 180 days, and the payees are properly notified in writing. We review fund balances to ensure fund accounts do not carry over a surplus of funds from one fiscal year to the next. And we also review the internal audit questionnaire to determine if schools are adhering to RPS policies, regulations, and procedures. So as you can see, the fiscal year 2020 results are outlined in the table below. And that's just telling you some of the things that we've noticed when we conducted the audit, such as, whether or not there were excessive balances, checks that were, more than 180 days. We also reviewed voided checks just to ensure that they were properly voided, which means that the word void must be on the check and the signature portion removed. We looked to see if there was supporting documentation and if they, had adequate supporting documentation. Missing checks, we reviewed to see why checks were not properly entered into the EPS system. We also looked at deposits to ensure that deposits were made timely, as well as we reviewed dual signatures to ensure that there were 2 authorized signatures. And that's, the school has to have at least 3 individuals on their check cashing policy at the bank. So we want to ensure that 2 of those 3 individuals are actually signing the checks. And one of those individuals has to be the principal unless the principal is out of the building for an extended period of time. Is that all to that particular?
Yep, that's the same
area that you did there? Okay. So, basically the findings that we have is just cash receipts, inadequate supporting documentation, incomplete, inaccurate, or not utilizing the settlement form, untimely deposits and receipts, inability, go ahead, back up. Okay,
I'm sorry.
thanks. Inability to properly enter receipts into EPS, missing receipts, and again, that's just receipts that were not entered into EPS, receipts not properly written, funds deposited into inappropriate SAF account. That means that if, you know, they raised money or money was submitted for, say, a particular fundraiser, that it was actually put in the fundraiser account, but instead, in this instance, it was put into another account instead of the fundraiser account. Inappropriate use of the sales tax exempt number. And then finding number 2 was check disbursements. Invoices weren't paid timely. There was no or inadequate supporting documentation, unauthorized expenditures. Some of the checks did not have 2 signatures, or the principal was not one of the signatures on the checks. Checks were not properly voided. Lack of check details, meaning the written and numerical amounts were not put on the checks. Missing checks, again, were not entered into EPS. Inappropriate authorization of expenditures. The principal is to authorize all purchases prior to purchases being made within the school, as well as they are to authorize disbursements. So before checks are even sent out of the building, the principal is to authorize that check disbursement. Return check fees. Some of the parents were overcharged for check fees. Inappropriate change fund, check cashing process. The check was made payable to the financial institution instead of to an individual. Funds dispersed from inappropriate SAF account. Non-approval of VHSL timesheets by the athletic director, principal, or assistant principal, and inability to properly enter checks into EPS, meaning bank fees, as well as pays were listed as miscellaneous or something of that nature, and not the actual individual name of the payee. The next category is accounting procedures. We saw that, you know, the schools, one good thing was, you know, that the administration had made it so that the last turnover audit that we did, that all of the schools had the opportunity to purchase safes. So that was one good thing that we noticed, that safes were actually purchased with all of the schools. However, all of the safes were not being utilized. Receipt books were at the finance officer's home, not in the school safe. There were checks that were not investigated and written correspondence sent to the payee prior to 180 days. The principal did not sign or date reconciliations to show evidence of a review, and reconciliations were not completed and or reviewed timely. There was a surplus of funds in some SAF accounts. Falsifying documentation, which included backdating financial reports, non-compliance with closure of savings and investment accounts, segregation of duty, which meant that the principal also received, receipted, dispersed, authorized expenditures and disbursements, as well as deposited funds into the bank and the student activity fund accounts. Inappropriate preferred method of payment. Basically in the school's handbook, they preferred that the parents only paid with checks instead of, you know, cash, if that's the, you know, basically the only method of payment that they had. So, you know, we discourage telling a parent that this is the only way that you can pay us with the check. Field trips not pre-approved at the beginning of the school year. We do make exceptions because there are some field trips that will come along during the year. However, it wasn't documented into the files. The next category, non-compliance with COVID-19 refund policy. When the school closed down due to COVID, there was a policy that was given to all of the schools of how to refund money back to the parents due to that closure. We noted that a school did not give any refunds at all. Personal funds were used to refund parents, and the preferred method was not used. They used cash instead of checks. And then finding 5, non-compliance with reporting finance officer changes. And that's withholding information. Technically, the manual states that when it comes to a finance officer change, that the principal must let audit know. They must also let human resources know, as well as payroll. And so that's where that category came in, withholding information pertaining to the finance officer. So they are the 5 categories and findings in which we noted during our turnover audit. Are there any questions for me at this time?
Well, I don't have a question, but I do want to chime in. I know one of the great things that Milton did for us this year was to summarize the top 3. And so even if folks look back on that chart, because I know reading down that long list can certainly make this sound a bit worse than it was. And I know that there was a number of very positive steps in the right direction. So to go over the 3 that Milton and I discussed, the lack of dual signatures was one of our top 3 trends. Just so that everyone on this call knows, we are reordering checks for all schools to include a dual signature line to promote that. And again, there were only 6 instances of this not happening, but still that was one of the top 3 trends. Bank reconciliations, as Milton and I discussed, we believe that this was a COVID contributor with folks not being in the building, such that mail was either coming later and or people were not in the buildings to pick up the bank statements in a timely manner. So we do believe that one will self-correct itself this year, hopefully. And then the third one was the unauthorized expenditure. And that is something that we'll be following up with principal directors on. Not that necessarily the expenditure itself was unauthorized, but that the process wasn't followed in terms of the principal giving pre-approval before the expenditure was made. So I appreciate the time that Milton and I were able to spend together so that we can kind of take these bite-sized things and fix them. As LaTanya mentioned, last year we worked through the safes so that everyone had a safe this year, so that wouldn't be a significant finding. And we're eager to do the same on these 3 as well, and cross those off of a long-term list.
Exactly, Michelle, and I'm just going to piggyback off of you. One of the things is what we noticed also, and this is just an observation, Wanda, for your team and you, and I know you guys struggle with this as well, or have, you know, with the finance officers, is that the banks, they don't always send the statements timely. So if the statement is due, or the reconciliation, bank reconciliation and stuff is due to finance on the 20th, some of the schools are not getting the bank statements until maybe the 15th. And then you're asking them to work a statement for 5 days, 5 business days, that is, because we don't expect them to work on the weekends and then get it sent down, sent down to finance or sent down to central office. That presents a challenge in itself that we may need to look at as an operational thing, as a unit, you know, as just one big collaborative unit. Because a lot of the finance officers also indicated that if they had access to the statements online, if they could just get online and pick the statement up and then print it out, they would, you know, they would be able to get it done a lot faster, even with the COVID changes going on as far as not being in the school, things of that nature. And I know LaTanya and Justin Carr, who's not on this meeting, but the accounting team, they have a meeting set up this week that they'll probably talk through some of those things as well. But I suspect if the finance officers and or the principals could get together or somehow get access to the bank statements online, not all the banks do it, but the more access they could get to an online type of setup where they can just push in, get a statement, and then, you know, have it printed out, they would, the timeliness issue would probably resolve itself a little more there too as well, Michelle.
Absolutely. Thanks again for naming things that aren't in the locus of our control, but that we need to work through. So appreciate that, Milton. We really are making progress, and I'm thankful for you noticing.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions. Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I don't know of any banks right now that aren't doing online statements. So I did have a question about why finance officers don't have access to online statements. And, you know, with 13 schools out of 16 that were selected, having 107 findings, and, you know, I understand some of them are less of an issue than others. It seems to me that this indicates that there might be a need for support or training for staff. Is there any kind of district-wide training provided to finance officers?
Yes, we've had 3 trainings in the last year. We had the first one around November 2020. We had another complete training in the spring. I think it was March 21. And we just had the one for the 21-22 school year last week. So we've had 3 complete trainings within a year.
Right.
As far as the online banking, Wells Fargo, I think, is one of the few banks that offers it for free. Everyone else, there is a charge, and it's cost prohibitive for the schools.
Oh, wow. All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I was going to say, Wanda, I'm glad you spoke of that, because a lot of it comes with the charge if they get online. And some of the schools, not all of them, there are some historic banks in the city that they deal with. And those banks just, they haven't graduated to the online method, and even sending stuff, some of the personal relationships that the finance officers had with the bank employees, say the teller or the bank manager, just through turnovers and things like that at the banks, as well as the schools. The banks won't print out, they could go down to the bank themselves and get a statement, but the bank won't print it out and give it to them because they're not technically authorized to do that anymore. So they just have to wait for the mail system. We know how USPS is, and that kind of delays things as well. So again, wanted to highlight not only the things that we can control, but some of the things that we can't control that kind of throw some challenges into the process as well when we start saying these things, because it's not all just, we're not doing the process. A lot of the finance officers are doing what they can control, but those things they can't control, we need to understand that they are the risk or the residuals that exist beyond what we can manage.
So Milton, this is year 2 for you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Year 2.
Going into year 2, yeah.
So Stephanie, just to give you some background information, we have not had an audit department since 2015. That department was eliminated in 2015. So since then, there has been no internal controls, or I'm not going to say no. We needed to tighten up on our internal controls, and so Milton and Tanya, they have been here 2 years, and it's like we've had to restart all over again, and to tighten the internal controls and to prevent a lot of these errors that we are experiencing. Yes, we are, as Michelle stated, the administration, they're working together with the internal auditing department. So it's work in progress.
Yeah.
And I'd like to add one other really positive step we've taken, which I think will help garner different results this year. So under Wanda's leadership, this past spring, for the first time, we formalized the performance expectations for a finance officer. Each finance officer was reselected, so that's why you will even likely see some additional turnover this year, based on specific qualifications that we identified would make for a successful finance officer. And their compensation for their role was standardized across the division based on school size, and is based on their successful completion of duties in the previous time period. So I think these additional quality controls around clear expectations, clear selection process, standardized and appropriate compensation and ongoing accountability should hopefully continue to help us to ensure we have the right people on the bus doing this role. So eager to see, and then pair that with Wanda's trainings this year for this new group. I'm hopeful that each audit we will continue to whittle down more and more. And I do also, but LaTanya, correct me if I'm wrong, we were looking at 107 citations over the course of a year's worth of work. So it might be that a school at one point didn't have dual signatures and at another point 4 months later did something. So it doesn't necessarily mean that that school never did dual signatures or never used their safe. It was a particular citation. Would you deem that accurate, LaTanya?
As far as the safe goes, the school did not use the safe at all. So that was, they didn't use it at all. And prior to that, they did not have a safe. As far as the dual signature goes, yes, you're correct. At some point during the audit period, they would actually do it, have two signatures, and then they would, and it's also based off of let me go ahead and put this out here. We do a sample size. And so, we don't look at the entire universe of things for an entire year. We take a sample of a certain amount of checks that they've written for that year, and we look at those particular checks to determine if they, there's dual signatures. So that's how that normally works. It's the same thing with receipts, and then bank reconciliations. We look at 3 separate months worth, always ending in the month that we're actually coming to the school to audit, and that's how that process works when we're looking at bank reconciliations.
Yeah. So what I'd say too is if it's not happening across the board, then that means that this is something that they understand. It's just maybe they missed it a few times. It's sort of like correcting grammar mistakes, right? If someone makes the same mistake over and over again, I understand they don't get the concept. Whereas if they do it sometimes, it just means that they're not, consistently.
Correct. And what I do is, and we're starting this year, is like Mr. Parker said, I'm having a meeting with finance on Thursday to discuss, schools that may need that additional help, schools that may need that additional training, so that going forward, if they ever feel like, hey, I'm struggling in a certain area, then, they can reach out themselves too as well to say, hey, I need that additional help. But yes, I will be letting finance know on Thursdays the schools that I feel needs the additional help, so they can get that help.
Right. And that was going to be my next question.
Process.
Yeah. What is your recommendation to improve these efficiencies with our schools? So as you just stated, you planning to have a meeting with finance, so the schools that continuously have errors may need a little bit more training.
Yes, ma'am. And I also want to say this, it's more too that I'm hoping that when we send out the reports, because we will also give finance a copy of all of the school's reports so that they can review them. It's that, they look at the recommendations and actually, train based off of the recommendations as well, that we give to the schools, so that going forward, they know that, hey, audit is looking for this. I'm also going to let them know too, when I sit down with them on Thursday, so that they have a clear understanding. So when they do additional trainings, that, hey, these are the areas that we're going to look at, so that nobody's surprised. Everybody has a clear understanding what audit's role is when they come out there. And hopefully that will lessen some of the audit findings that we see as well. It's more of an educational process than it is, hey, guys, we got you. This is what you did. Now we expect you to fix it. No, it's going to be an ongoing process. We're going to keep in touch with, finance, so that, they know the schools that need the additional help, and we see to it that they get it. So it's more of a collaborative role between finance as well as audit.
Okay. And I have another question. The surplus of fund balances in the student activity funds, why is that? Because student activity funds, that's money coming in, and is money should be going out, correct?
Yes, ma'am. What I'm noticing when it comes to the surplus of funds is some of the accounts, they were unable to spend the funds due to COVID. And some of the account balances, they had inherited those balances. So they didn't quite know what to do with the money that they inherited from, say, a principal that was there before. So they had that additional money in there, and they were still collecting funds on top of the money that they had. So my recommendation was to try to spend down some of that money prior to collecting more money. Or if you have to collect more money, say for a field trip that may cost a large amount of money, that you go ahead and you charge a price that's a little bit less than the actual, try to spend down that money and then add to that balance to be able to pay off that amount. Don't charge the entire amount and just have those funds sitting there. So that way they can easily pay down the balance as well.
Okay.
And Dawn, one thing to add, you might recall that last year, Milton and I brought to the board, and the board voted to approve that the one-time opportunity for schools to roll over the old accounts. So I think we were all quite pleased to not see that coming up as a finding, but that goes to why some of them therefore had balances. Although I do want to clarify, it is okay to maintain a student activity fund balance, but you're right. I mean, you raised the money for a reason, so spend it, but that's not a finding to have a balance. But I do think this year, schools do have those archived balances rolled over that hopefully they'll be able to find good use for.
Right. I remember that report.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
So the
Stephanie?
question, or were you going to say something, Ms. Page?
No, I'm just asked, did you have any other questions?
Yeah, so in the cases where parents were overcharged, were those situations resolved?
Well, our recommendation was basically to the fee that is, that they actually, the bank assesses the school for insufficient funds, that fee has to be passed along to the parents. So that was a recommendation. However, I mean, it was in their handbook, so it would be kind of difficult for the school to go back to try to see all of the parents, because this is another recommendation that I made. There's a form that's included in the manual to do, NSF fee checks that are return checks. So there's a log that the finance officer can write down the individual's name for the bounce check, as well as the amount and whether or not the check has been cleared. So that's another recommendation that I made. Also, like I said, the form is included in the manual. However, they had not started to do that. So they were unaware of what, parents they actually overcharged for the fees. So my recommendation was going forward to use that log, as well as to only charge fees that the bank assesses the school, not to overcharge, and to remove that bit of verbiage from their handbook. So they have since done that. And, once we do audits, we just don't leave it there. We do follow-ups with the schools to ensure that they, understand our recommendations and have, adhered to the recommendations. So the school has done that.
Thank you. And is there someone that they can call, like the finance officers, who can be a resource for them when they have questions?
Yes, I've made it clear to them that they can, always, if they have questions, they can call me, and I can, try to answer it to the best of my ability. But also finance has, put it out there that they can contact them if they have any questions and concerns, that they can contact them as well.
And if I'm not mistaken, I'm gonna look at Wanda for this. I believe there are some quote unquote peer group, like a peer representative, that some of the finance officers can piggyback off of some of those finance officers that are out in the field, and they could call. Let's say they can't get to Justin Carr or Nishan Lee, who works in accounting and works in finance. They can then call, let's say, whoever's over at Westover or Ginter Park, and they can kind of, they can ask for the best practice that they're using or how things would be done. And I think, Wanda, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I know you guys identify those people, and then the trainers, they kind of give away those, those contact information give away that contact information if you need a peer group or a buddy to kind of help you with that.
You're correct.
Yes.
You're correct, but we also make ourselves available to all the finance officers. We let them know if they need any individual training, they can reach out. They can come down to City Hall to meet with us. We can help them via Zoom, or before COVID, we even went to the schools to help them one-on-one, so.
Yep. All right, so any other questions behind student activity funds? All right, I'll take the silence as a no.
Okay.
So we wanted to kind of, with that being said, and we've done a lot of work to student activity funds over the last couple of years. This is actually, I believe, the second iteration of the student activity, the turnover audit. And so last year we had a work plan. I will say that it was probably very aggressive, and then with COVID involved in it, and the turnovers, we weren't able to get many process audits or performance and like I said, control audits done, or performance type audits done. And this year we wanted to scale it back a little bit, but we wanted to, in talking with the administration, I'm about to share this work plan. In addition to the student activity funds, because that's a compliance thing for the state of Virginia, as well as the turnovers and fraud, waste, and abuse, we wanted to talk about two good audits that would help not only us achieve our goals of oversight as far as the board's oversight into the daily operations, but also something that would help the administration and the operational side of the house. And so with that being said, I'm going to share this year's work plan, and you'll see the two audits on it and what we plan to do. All right. So not sure, I know a lot of you have seen this. This is our work plan. This is our structured work plan. This is just a draft right now. So, and this talks about our objectives, things of that nature, performance. And we do this based on a risk assessment. Again, this year we didn't have to do much of a risk assessment because we were carrying forward, we plan to carry forward to do audits that we had planned for in the past. And so that's our risk assessment process. And again, this is based on our financials, compliance, as well as some of the departmental structures or the process structures, along with the technical structures in those departments. And I'm just going to scroll to the actual work plan itself, the audits. That's what people want to see. I know last year we talked about the distribution of Chromebooks. We are in the process right now of kicking off this audit, distribution of Chromebooks and electronic devices. What we do know is that this was a new process as of, I believe, March 2020, April 2020. This was a new process. However, this has now gone through two iterations. It's gone through a distribution and a collection, and then it's gone through another distribution, and now in the process of a distribution, collection and a distribution. So what we wanted to look at here is to make sure that the controls are actually working as they were planned and implemented, to ensure that all of the Chromebooks that we sent out, all of the Chromebooks, or at least 98% of the Chromebooks that we're getting back. And this is for a number of reasons, because IT needs the Chromebooks back for refresh purposes. They need to see what needs to go out for repair, and then get the Chromebooks back to the students for one-to-one, should anything go wrong. Of course, we know with the Delta variant right now, this may become a real thing very soon. And so we don't want to anticipate anything, and we don't want to be in a reactive mode. So we kind of want to look at the controls to make sure that at least they're in place, and kids can properly get their devices serviced as such. And then our next audit here, and you see the student activity fund, school turnover audits, fraud, waste, and abuse. Those are annual audits. They're going to be done every year. And so with the capacity that we have, we wanted to add one other audit for now that we know we can handle. Excuse me, and that is the procurement of the Pcard process. There was a push some time ago to push out the Pcards, and we now want to go look at the Pcard processes to make sure that the schools are, or the recipients of the Pcards are actually using them right, and also that we're getting as much rebate as we can possibly get through the use and the agreements we have set up for rebates and things of that nature as a part of our reward to use those Pcards on a daily basis versus the old, our old check method and credit card method and reimbursement method. So those are the two right now that we're proposing for the FY 2022 year.
Okay. So Milton, are any of these items time sensitive? And the reason why I'm asking, because we don't have a quorum, and so we can give Liz an update and to determine how to move forward.
I'm glad you asked, Ms. Page, because that was the next piece I was going to talk about. Although we don't have a quorum today, we need a vote on the actual audit work plan that needs to come from then the school board at large. My hope is that the audit work plan could be reported back. Either it could be voted on and agreed here in this form when we have a quorum, and then at the school board, we could just, the finance committee could report out to the school board other information and use that platform for what it's for, versus, myself having to actually go in, explain it again, so forth and so on. I do plan to send out this information to all 9 school board members and take questions individually. Should anybody have questions, should anybody have any other suggestions of audits that they may want to put on for you all to vote on. So that's pretty much the only time sensitive thing at this point in time.
So our next school board meeting is the 13th of September, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And then our next finance meeting is not until the 28th.
Right.
So Michelle,
Yes.
and Milton, you chime in, and Stephanie, add it as an agenda item.
Well, right now we do have in other information where the committees report out on their committee meetings, and I guess normally Liz would do that, but I guess either Dawn or Stephanie will need you to write the report up from tonight's meeting, so that can be shared back when the board committees report out. But if we need to add action, I'm not actually sure, Nicole, if board action is required for the audit, or if that we just want to put that in the report of it's the recommendation of the Finance and Audit Committee that these be the two, and then if a board member wants to discuss that, it can be pulled out. Does that need to be voted on, do you think, or is that just good for consensus?
Milton, you need feedback, right?
I need feedback, and it needs to be approved by the board as a whole.
Yeah,
This
I know it
requires
needs to
board
be
approval.
voted on, but I thought, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it was voted, and Michelle and Ms. Page, you may remember, I feel like it was consent agenda.
You could try that.
So that's what I remember from the last one. If anybody else, like, it just goes on the consent agenda. And I would have to go back and look, but that's based on my memory that it went on the consent agenda. And to Michelle's point, if there were questions, it could be pulled off. But that's the way I remembered it, because I don't recall there from going back and watching it, there being any questions last year. But again, okay, again, I'm going by memory here. Yeah. But that's the way I remember it being done last year.
Right, but we have new members
right,
who need to provide feedback. So Milton,
Yes, ma'am.
and Stephanie, you can chime in. You think we give a synopsis of the meeting today and then share that information with board members to ask for feedback? And
Well-
that way we'll be able to, ready to move forward on the 13th. What do you
Well,
think about that?
I think I heard Mr. Parker just say that he was going to share this with board members in an email and allow people to, you know, make comments
Right.
that way. And if that happens, then, you know, I could see it going on a consent agenda and, you know, we just go ahead and approve it, you know, if people have had a chance electronically to make comments and.
Right, and that's what I was saying, you know, getting with Mr. Parker and sending that information out to board members to provide feedback.
Yeah, so tomorrow, one of my tasks for tomorrow was after this meeting, following this meeting, I would send out the actual audit report from the student activity fund, as well as or the turnover. I don't want to say student activity fund because that audit still has to come to year end, but the turnover audit, as well as the audit work plan to the board at large, and then ask for them to provide feedback. And I'm thinking out loud right now. I think I'll do that on some type of Google Doc where I can pull it off and then see what everything is being done in a comprehensive way. And then we'll go from there. And if there's no, you know, if there's no feedback or there's no, you know, questions or anything, then we'll move forward accordingly. This is supposed to be a very iterative process where we're kind of working hand in hand back and forth. Again, I've already talked with Michelle and Mr. Cameras on the administration side. Now I need to see from the board side, is there anything else we may need to add or change around, maybe not Pcards or something else that may be a little more pressing. And again, that direction comes from the board on that behalf.
Okay.
So I have a quick question about the plan,
Yes,
Mr.
ma'am.
Parker. Who primarily uses Pcards? Where are the vast majority of them distributed?
Now that is a Michelle question.
Okay.
The board voted just a couple of months ago to expand them to all schools and departments. So everyone now has the opportunity to have every school has a Pcard. They're being trained with our Pcard coordinator. And then departments can add them if they didn't have one already. So everyone should have access to a Pcard.
So there's no one department that tends to use them more than others? Or you know, use, I mean, I understand that this is a new initiative, but like, do you anticipate that there might be more use?
Well, the usage limits are low, so $1,000 for any particular usage and $5,000 a month max. So, no, I don't necessarily think with those low limits that any one group would use it significantly more. I mean, I guess maybe schools with smaller populations who would be making more small purchases. Wanda or Lynn, would you chime in with anything, any different thoughts on who might use a Pcard more than someone else?
I believe the talent office has 3 assigned to them, and they've got higher limits because normally what they would use them for is recruiting and travel and those sorts of things. So there are, and the facilities department also has one, and they would have a higher limit, again, because of the types of things that they buy as compared to a school.
Okay, thank you.
And this was a cost savings that you all reported out to us as well, or some efficiencies?
You get cash back just like you can get on a regular
Right.
credit card. So there's actually an incentive for people to use the Pcard. And frankly, it saves, I think Lynn and I had looked at it, well over 1,000 POs for our procurement team to process because they're on a credit card instead of coming through as a formal PO. So there's definitely a human efficiency, plus there's a little financial perk.
Right, I remember receiving that information a few months back.
Yeah.
So thanks. Okay. We ready to move on to the next item? Or have,
No, we're done. I'm good. If we're good, I'm good.
so I think Liz she spearheaded the feedback, the survey. And I'm not sure if that information has been compiled. So that is information, Stephanie, that she can disseminate with board members, the feedback from the survey.
All right.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns? Okay. But if there are none, this meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.